Rich men, they wage war, and poor men, they die in the war. That has been the sentiment of world history from the beginning. And here we are arguing over Republican and Democrat and the Civil War. Let me preface this by saying the Civil War, whether people want to admit it or not, was over slavery. Now, the Confederates will say that it was over states' rights. Well, it was the state right to own slaves. Because let me paint you a picture of the scenario that was going on at the time, because we seem to forget how history was functioning and what the mentality was at that time frame. And these two gentlemen, these two, Kelly and Will, and then Will and Isaac went into a very long discussion. And as Will and Isaac may have noticed on Facebook, I liked every last one of their comments because they were making valid points, but their points are without true understanding. You see, we fight about Republican and Democrat, and the reason why I'm an independent is because I recognize that neither Democrat nor Republican is actually for me. Not me. Me as a black man, definitely not. Me as a man who is not super wealthy, definitely not. So therefore, neither party actually cares anything about me. And that's the first thing you should understand. And you should understand that even back in the time frame of the 1860s, neither party had actually cared about the average soldier. Will made the point that said, do you not know how many of them died to end slavery? You should be more thankful and not a smartass, because Kelly said that out of the goodness of their hearts or over their economic motives. Even those who fought in the war had a certain economic benefit. Some of them were poor, and they saw fighting in the military as a way to get out of their poverty, which in much the same happens today, where people go into the military, especially those who are more impoverished, because it's a way out of their situation. You don't see many wealthy families, sons and daughters going into the military, because this is more of a middle class, poor people thing to go fight in the military. And the same thing was going on at that time frame. But to understand that time frame, as Isaac pointed out, the Republicans were the liberal party at the time frame. The Democrats were the conservative parties. And then throughout the 20th century, we saw those two parties switch ideologies. And the Democrats became the liberal party, and the Republicans became the conservative party. So to compare and say that the Republicans freed the slaves, and then want to carry that into today and say that Republicans were the party that freed the slaves as if they have the same ideology, is completely incorrect. Republicans back then were more liberal, but were they truly more liberal, or was it about economics and power? The truth of the matter is, it was about economics and power. You see, you had a couple of states getting ready to come into the Union. The South wanted those states to be able to choose whether or not they wanted to be free states or slave states, whereas the North was saying that no, those states should be free states. This was not because the North was so concerned about the humanity that was going on considering black people as slaves in America. No, the North didn't want those states coming in as slave states because it would give the South more power. And the power battle was going on between the northern states and the southern states. And if those states would have came in as slave-owning states, then those states would have most likely been Democratic states. And then therefore the northern Republican states would have been losing power, and the Democrats would have controlled the North. And there was already contention about the Southern power. This is why we have the 2/5 compromise. The South was saying that all our slaves should be able to count as votes, and a slave owner should be able to vote for his slave, therefore giving them more popular vote over the North, where the Northern said, well, no, we're not going to let you have that, but we want to tax you for each slave as property. So sure, the North was for the black people. They wanted to tax them as property. But the slave owners were saying, hell no, that's too much money. You're trying to get all our money. So the 2/5 compromise. 2/5 taxation, 2/5 vote. So the value of a slave was 2/5, politically and economically. Those types of factors led to this Civil War. It was all about slavery, but it wasn't so much about the humanity of slavery as much as it was about the economics and political power of slavery. So even when we go into the war, and he like to say that the Republicans were the one who said that they freed the slaves, Lincoln, your Republican president, said that if he could have maintained the Union without freeing one slave, he would have done so. So it wasn't about freeing the slaves and the humanity of the slaves. It was about the economics and the political power surrounding slavery. And for the average man who was fighting for the North and the average man who was fighting for the South, you had a mixed bag, and the overwhelming majority of them did not care two shits about the slaves. You probably had more Southerners who cared about maintaining the institution than you did Northerners, but at the end of the day, neither one cared about the humanity of the slaves. If they cared about the humanity of the slaves, then we would not have had Jim Crow laws. And don't think for one second that Jim Crow laws only existed in the South. Jim Crow laws existed in the North as well. They just weren't as stringent. Black man travels across one state to another state with a white woman in tow, he's end up in federal prison. Didn't matter what state. Black people being lynched, black people being beaten on the streets, police not doing a damn thing about it. That happened in all the states. So therefore, it wasn't about the humanity of the slaves. It was simply about the political power, because both North and South didn't give two shits about the humanity of slaves. So no, I do not give a whole bunch of, oh, they were so great and thankful, and I'm thankful for the soldiers who died. Those soldiers died for economics. Those soldiers died for political power. Wranglings of rich men utilizing the bodies of poor men. They weren't thinking about the people in itself. It's much the same way that I went to Desert Storm, the first Iraqi war. They was telling us the whole time, liberate Kuwait, liberate Kuwait. Hell, when we got there and the war started, most of the Iraqis had already left. Kuwait was pretty much already liberated by the time we got there and got started. So was it really about liberating Kuwait? Or was it really about making sure that Saddam Hussein doesn't have a port that he can launch attacks into Saudi Arabia and UAE, and therefore control the oil and mess up all the rich folks' money and economies? Or was it about the fact that when he went into Kuwait, he took all their precious metals and ran them all back to Iraq? And maybe that's why we actually went all the way up into Iraq, because Kuwait was liberated within a few days. Rich men wage war, poor men die. You think that any of us actually cared about what was going on the ground? We was doing our job as a standing military. Sure, we accept the propaganda, made it easier for us to do our job. But for those of us who looked deeper into it, we knew the reality of the situation. Just like those men knew the reality of it during the Civil War time frame. They were fighting to keep a country together and keep it from splitting. They were not fighting in order to free slaves. As a matter of fact, at the Emancipation Proclamation, only freed slaves in warring states. If a state was not at war with the Union, but fighting on the side of the Union, then that state would be able to maintain its slaves after the Civil War. That's what the Emancipation Proclamation was. It didn't stop any other states from being able to have slaves, just those who have seceded from the Union, as an extra little punishment. And the only reason Lincoln did that is because the northern people were starting to feel like, is it worth it? Is the Civil War worth it? So he gave them another cause to keep fighting for. And that's the only reason he did it. Like he said, if he could have kept the Union without freeing a slave, he would have. So there's no point in arguing. And then as far as Republicans, Democrats, they both are just sitting there like, yeah, arguing against each other about what's going to be the best benefit for themselves. And black people sitting on one side of the fence. Now, you need to sit on both sides of the fence. But the true matter is, you need to start buying land, owning land, becoming more financially powerful. Because the only power that matters in this country is the power of money. That's it. So you got to free yourself to be yourself. because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey. Good